I don't remember if I've shared this with you guys, but I'm actually a researcher. What do I research? Comics. Yes, I really do that. It's how I justify buying new books and perpetually being poor anyway. And my area of study? Time. And contextual history, but let me explain the time thing. In the book Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, which is really interesting as it's an educational book about comics written in the comic medium. Anyway, he comments,
"To kill a man between panels is to condemn him to 1,000 deaths."
It's a line that always sticks in my head. It's very poetic. But what McCloud is talking about is how time works in comic books. The space between the panels and how time works within that space. When I'm reading a comic, the space between panels can be a few seconds or years apart. It all depends on the context. What's in those panels? A number of researchers in the academic field have looked into it, including both Scott McCloud and Neil Cohen. There's a theorist that you come across a lot in university named Marshall McLuhan, and even in the 60s he noted this by saying,
"The viewer or reader is compelled to participate in completing and interpreting the few hints provided by the bounding lines."
Basically, we take part in the work by making the connection between the two panels and figuring out the time between them. In a conversation, it's simple, it's probably just a few seconds between panels. But when we cut to a different scene and it's now day when it was night, then it's maybe been a few hours, it could be in the next day or the next year. Unless there is a specific caption or a clock on show, it's all best guess. Hints and clues to give the illusion of moving time. Over time, no pun intended, artists and writers have played with this idea, even if it's not consciously. They play with the structure of the panel border in order to distort time within the story. Enough of the smart talk, if you can call it that, let's look at some examples, see if I can explain what the hell I'm interested in. Zero Hour is a sort of sequel to 1986's Crisis on Infinite Earths. It came out in 1994 and featured a now evil Hal Jordan going under the name Parallax as he attempts to destroy and remake the DC universe. It's not a bad story, I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. As the story reaches its final act in the last two issues, Parallax succeeds in his plan. Time momentarily blips out of existence, leaving nothing but a white page. As the final issue begins, that same white page stares back at you, but as the new page proceeds, we see panels slowly begin to fade back into existence. Time begins to start again in the DC universe. Panels begin to appear once more. There's a very direct and powerful connection between the disappearance of time and the missing panels. It's the panel borders specifically that we see first, not the characters or scenes. It's the borders themselves, the very thing that signifies time. They don't fade back in as you might expect, they slowly come into existence as patches of green light with no sense of order. Why? Because time is erratic, and it's trying to reorder itself. Zero Hour's subtitle is Crisis in Time, and that's exactly what we see here. Next, let's look at the Rebirth line of Flash comics. To be honest, it's the first set of Flash comics I've read, but I'm slowly fixing that. With a character like the Flash, time works a little differently. Multiple comics have made comments about how he views time differently. Take Injustice when he and Superman are having a conversation during a large-scale invasion, but it's rarely shown in the comic itself. There might be some speed lines or blur effects, but his actual perspective isn't shown often. But Joshua Williamson and an artist name I'm gonna butch, Carmine Giando Mentico, I tried, implement this effect in the paneling itself. As he's running at super speed, the paneling is doing its best to keep up with him. It's a direct correlation. This is how the Flash sees time, and a physical representation of the time and in the paneling. It gives us a form of understanding as to how time works for him and other speedsters. Panels are stretched and skewed as though time is racing to catch up to him, bursting with the same electrical energy the Flash gives off. The last example I want to use is a pretty fun one, and is possibly a lot more direct than the others, or at least the easiest to see. Gwenpool is a character that does break the fourth wall, a character from the real world who is fully aware of being in a comic book. able to make jokes about it and knowing almost everything about the characters around her. But her knowledge does only get her so far, since she is just a normal person. But there is one thing she does know that the others don't. Comics are made up of panels. Midway through her original series, she starts to break down the panel borders, literally, physically pulling the panels apart and erasing them. The problem is that she is seeing this in a 3-dimensional, maybe even 4-dimensional state. Time itself begins to appear before her. She looks in one direction, she sees the panels yet to come, her immediate future. Through this, we can see how panels dissolve look to the character. Think back to 0 Hour. We saw it as panels fading back in, but what did the characters see? Does the world itself dissolve the same as the panel borders did for us? Is it patchy, more solid maybe? With Gwenpool, we see the perspective shift. We see a 3-dimensional breaking of panels, or at least what would be 3-dimensional to them. An erased panel border to us shows as a fragment in time and space to Gwen, a crack in the space in front of her, while she is able to see the future panels repeated before her eyes. A lot of this stuff I have covered in a piece for sequel art, but it's the best way to understand the basics of this. The more you know about it, the more you notice. Grant Morrison makes note of this in, Multiversity. But that's not even taking into account how digital comics are affected by this. What happens when the panels have something that is already time-dependent inside it, like music or a video. This is what I research, and it's something I think people would enjoy knowing. Personally, I'd love to also look into this form from a historical standpoint. At what point in time did people start playing with this idea? What's the most creative use? Am I crazy and this is all a waste of time? Maybe, but it's fascinating nonetheless. I want to really thank Scott from NerdSync and Shane from My Dumb Question, who literally took a 2-second prompt from me of, hey, I've got quotes that need voicing, and got back to me incredibly quickly with a lot of really fun takes. I wish I could use the most dramatic of Scott's takes, but it doesn't really fit tonally. I'm very tempted just to slip it in because I loved it so much. Yes, go check out their channels. I have them listed on screen. Let me know about what you think about this, because this is a really weird topic, but it's something that I care quite a lot for some reason. Till next time.